Welcome to stage 10 of Misspoke, a cycling podcast going out during this period of coronavirus, pandemic, lockdown, quarantine, whatever you want to call it. And I hope you come out of this, and I hope we all come out of this pretty soon and we're all safe and well. Anyway, I'm going to start stage 10 with chapter 7 of my novella about the Liege, Bastogne Liege Sportive, which is called The Monument. And if you'd rather read this as a book, you can buy it from Amazon or you can download it for your Kindle. Anyway, this is chapter 7. As promised, they left on Thursday, the end of April, driving down to the tunnel, cursing the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit all along the M20. The bikes on the roof of the stonking red Mazda secured to Tula bike racks, their kit safely stored in the boot. They breezed through the automatic number plate check, and then Clovis almost drove under the low barrier, forgetting about the bikes on the roof. "Christ," said Eric, "don't do that on the way back or we're all fucked. Just what we need. Their bikes flying off the roof and smashing on the ground, cocaine or smack blowing away in the wind." "What do you mean, their bikes?" "They're our bikes. They're not coming back with us." "Since when?" "Nobody told me this," said Clovis. "Fact is, no one's told me shit, including you." "Look," said Eric, "it stands to reason, doesn't it? They can't fill our bikes with whatever it is if we're riding them. So they take our bikes and we bring different bikes back with us. What if they spot that we've got different bikes? Who's going to spot that? We don't declare what bikes we've got. They don't know. We go out with bikes, we come back with bikes. What difference does it make? You ever hear of CCTV? We just got filmed going through there. Or have you forgotten already?" "I like my Giant," said Clovis. "When do I get it back?" "They bring it back," said Eric. "Same day as us." "How?" "I don't know. They didn't tell me that." "Seems you've had a few conversations with them you're not telling me about. When was this one?" "He phoned me," said Eric. "Yesterday." "Who phoned you?" "Bob." "Well, it may have been Bill." "Don't you know?" said Clovis. "I get them mixed up," said Eric. Clovis parked in front of the terminal and they went inside. Eric went for a pee and Clovis ordered a coffee and a bacon sandwich. It wasn't a patch on Jay's. The roll was flaccid, the butter non-existent, and the bacon was dried and peeling and helpless. It looked like sunburnt skin. Clovis sat on a high stool at a high table. It was uncomfortable and his legs dangled in the air. "Where's mine?" said Eric, emerging from the toilet and wiping his hands on his trousers. "I didn't know what you wanted," said Clovis. Eric scowled and bought a coffee. "Not eating?" said Clovis. "Not hungry." "Have this," said Clovis. "It's shit." He held out the remains of his bacon roll. Eric sniffed it and pushed it away. "Forget it," he said. They sat in silence, watching the big television screen on the wall. The terminal was busy with waiting families and overweight lorry drivers. Their number came up. "Time to go," said Clovis. The passport officer glanced at their passports. "Take your glasses off, sir," she said to Eric. "Sorry," said Eric, and removed his sunglasses. "Where are you going?" she said. "Liege, Belgium," said Clovis. "Cycling." "You cyclists, then?" Yeah," said Clovis. "You don't look like cyclists," said the passport officer. "Have a safe journey." "Do you think she sussed us?" said Clovis. "No, of course not. She was just being funny." "I didn't think it was funny," said Clovis. They drove onto the train and stayed in the car as the heavy steel shutters rolled down. "Tell me," said Clovis, "what else did you discuss when you had your little discussion with Mr. Big?" Eric said, "Sunday we drive out to watch the pro race. We leave the bikes behind. When we get back, our new bikes are there. We load them on the car and Monday we drive home." "And what happens when we get home?" "We stop at Jay's and unload the bikes. Then you drop me off at home and you drive home. That's it. We won't get back until about 8. Jay's will be shut. We leave the bikes round the back. There'll be a lock there. We lock them up with the combination and leave." "So Jay's in it too? When do we get paid? And how?" "Of course he's in it. They're all in it. Cash. I'm not sure when." "Including the old woman, the homeless man and his mate? Wolfie and Smack, they in it too? Steve? Do you trust them?" Eric said, "What choice do we have? And Steve's the boss." "The boss is a cyclist. We're in luck," said Clovis. And what if we pull out, change our minds, lose our nerve, bottle it? Have you changed your mind? I'm nervous. The guard came along and read the barcode on the hanger hanging from their mirror. Merci, monsieur, she said. Merci, said Clovis. They looked out of the window as the train pulled away and the scenery gave way to the dark tunnel. The car behind them, a Honda SUV, contained a family of 5. The children jumped out and ran around. The father headed off through the door to find the toilet. Clovis checked that the bikes were secure on top of the stonking red Mazda. He began to wonder if getting a car with such a distinctive colour was a mistake. Even the car looked guilty, and they hadn't done anything yet. But thinking about it and agreeing to it was doing it, and they were in it now, up to their necks. And I didn't even need the money, said Clovis. I must be mad. Now in stage 11, we'll move on to part 2, and we're into Belgium. Make sure you stick around and catch stage 11 of the Misspoke podcast when it comes out in the next couple of days. And now another one of my affectionate monologues, and this one is called The Time Trialist. So anyway, the season is starting soon. I'm starting with the 10 on the G17 course down at Broadbridge. I'm hoping for a PB. I hate all those roundabouts, getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I love it. You get it out of the way and the rest of the day is free to go cycling. I'm getting a new bike this year, a Dolan. It gets great reviews. I've been using that Planet X Exocet, like the missile, because it goes like a missile. I'm doing the 25, then they're booked right through until October. I fancy doing 100, but not a 12-hour. The 12-hour is mental, just soul-destroying. I've got a new aero helmet that can save like a minute over the hour, and some shoe covers that can save like 30 seconds over the hour. It all helps. It's all about seconds. The position is the hardest thing, but you've got to get as aero as possible. Wind resistance is your big enemy. They say that 80% of your effort on the road goes to overcome wind resistance. I'm doing the Medway 2 up course. You really need to know your partner. The Duo is a fabulous event, even if you don't like time trials. You'll love it. It's in Normandy, France, I think. And it's the only event where pros get to compete with amateurs, or vice versa. I know the letters and numbers G17 thing. It's confusing. You know why that is, don't you? It's because the event started in secret, because you couldn't race on open roads, even though it's not a race, really. You're only competing against yourself and trying to get a PB. But it is a race, really. There's always someone who has the fastest time. It's usually Tadros or Steve Dennis. No, I've never won. 20 bloody years I've been doing this and never won, but it's not a race. Wigo turned up at an open 10 a few years ago. There's some video on YouTube. You should check it out when the weather's bad. It's rough. And then if you puncture, that's the worst. You're in the middle of bloody nowhere. It's freezing cold. 6:30 in the morning when you could be in bed with the wife. And you're trying to fix a puncture with frozen hands and the wind cuts through your skin suit. I hate it, to be honest with you. But what can you do? It gets me out of the house, so the wife says. I've got all my times in this little black book. Do you want to have a look? No, go on. This will be the last of the season, I think. I've had enough. Have you done the G17 course? What was your time? No, it's not a race. I'm just interested is all. My back is killing me. You've got to be aero. There's some video on YouTube of some bloke riding along and he's all bent over an aero and his back is dead flat and there's a bottle on his back and it stays there for miles. It's amazing. That's how you need to be, but I can't do that anymore. I've had enough. My back is killing me. I've got these almost new zips. Never raced or rallied. Do you fancy them? Cost me £2,000. Yours for $12.50. Go on, it's a bargain. They're going on eBay otherwise. One of the elements of the Misspoke podcast, which I thought I'd include, would be the occasional rant. And as cyclists, we all want to rant about something or other. And this is a particular rant that I had. It happens to be on a Thursday, funnily enough. And it's called the Thursday Rant. And here goes. By the way, there's some bad language in this rant. Not overly surprising, perhaps. It's Thursday and it's November and I'm back from a cycle ride. Nothing special. 30 miles through the Kent countryside. Beautiful autumn colours, a sudden but swift patch of torrential driving rain, a warming cup of tea and a flapjack to fuel the final push for home. It was a mudguards kind of day. I came in cold and wet, never quite dressed correctly, sometimes too hot when it's warm, sometimes too cold when it's cool. A new pair of shoe covers, not warm because they didn't seem needed, but were when the heavens opened. A skull cap to keep my ears warm, which got soaked through, and the heater in the cafe was off, so I couldn't be dried. It was a day all cyclists would recognise, and most would love. The cold, wet misery you feel while out on the road, rewarded by a warm house, a fan heater, a towel for your head, gloves and socks gently laid on the radiator to steam and dry, a fresh cup of tea, the perfect gift from your partner. It's why we ride, why we love it so, why we brave the inclement conditions. It's the ritual of the bike preparation, the shall I, shan't I go out, no I won't but I should, but I don't fancy it, but I ought to go. That text from your mate, you coming or what? And you fancy the what, but give in to the coming and go after all, and glad you did. It was a mudguards kind of day. Anyway, I was heading home, my mate some way behind, climbing a long steep hill, out of the saddle, as you do, but going straight, not weaving, not causing a nuisance, not annoying other road users, not blocking the way, when a small white car passed, and the passenger leaned out of the window and shouted, "Get off the fucking road!" Now, I can understand if I had offended him in some way. Perhaps I was weaving over the road, or had cut him up at the previous junction, or I'd overtaken him on the inside and nudged his wing mirror with my elbow, or he'd nudged me at a traffic light and I'd gobbed on his window, which I understand couriers do in London sometimes, or I had some slogan on the back of my jacket which was offensive to drivers of little white cars, or I'd committed some other transgression that I wasn't aware of, and he'd decided to get his own back by shouting at me as he drove past. I wouldn't condone it, would hopefully not do it myself, would try and keep my offended feelings in check. But I hadn't done anything wrong, and I wasn't doing anything wrong. But nonetheless, he felt the need to shout, "Get off the fucking road," as he went past. So the question has to be, why would you do that? Why would you feel the need to drive past a 62-year-old retired gentleman who was riding his bicycle along a country road in Kent on a sweet autumn damp day and unload a mouthful of abuse? What twisted, bitter, shallow rage lies behind that sort of behaviour? All cyclists experience this kind of abuse on a fairly regular basis, and some cyclists give out this abuse, sometimes in return and sometimes because they themselves are not very nice people. And perhaps that is the reason. Everyday kindness has dropped out of normal discourse post-Brexit vote and been replaced by everyday offensiveness, and now it's the new normal for cyclists to suffer at the hands of motorists. Should we overanalyse it? Should we suspect that a man who drives a small white car feels inadequate or ashamed, guilty that he has not achieved something more in life than the ability to transport a passenger in a fairly old, nondescript conveyance, not a Porsche, a Mercedes, an Audi, not even a Ford Focus RS with flaring wheel arches and an aggressive spoiler, and hence feels the need to abuse a defenceless retired road user? Or is it that he is just driving through Kent on a November afternoon, aimless and mindless, free of the normal worries that plague those with an IQ higher than room temperature, searching for retired gentlemen cyclists to abuse? I could have chased him down, caught him at the lights, there were no lights, or sat down on the saddle and raised one arm and given the gesture made famous by the bowmen of Cressy, or even shouted after him in words of similar ilk and questioned his parentage or likened him to a part of the female anatomy, or even accused him of excessive onanism. But I didn't. I rode serenely on, crested the hill and drifted down the other side, damp, a little irritable, but determined not to drown the rest of the day in rancour and distress. It had been a mudguards kind of day. And now a word from my sponsor. I don't have a sponsor for this podcast, by the way, and if you run a large multinational or even a small national or just a local business and you'd like to sponsor a little podcast called Misspoke, then please feel free to get in touch. But in the absence of a real sponsor, I shall make up my sponsors, only I haven't made them up. I've only made them up in terms of claiming that they're sponsors. They're not really sponsors, but they are products or things to do with cycling that I quite like or think are pretty good. So the thing I've chosen for stage 10 of this podcast is a Finish Line Speed Bike Degreaser. It comes in a yellow can, which I happen to be holding in my hand, and it is the best bicycle chain, drive chain, gear, degreaser that I have ever used. Now, it isn't cheap. I'll give you that. It is not cheap. but it is incredibly effective. And there's something rather joyful and rather wonderful to hold the can in your hand and point the aerosol at your chain or your rear cassette cogs and spray it and just watch the grease fall away. There is something truly magical about that. And it says on here, blast grime away. And it says, Speed Bike Degreaser is the fast, no scrub way to remove grease and grime off your bicycle chain. And that's pretty much what I've just said. It is a superb bike degreaser. I must say, in light of President Trump's comments, that you cannot cure coronavirus either by drinking or spraying Finish Line Speed Degreaser either onto yourself or onto your lungs, should that be possible. So do not do it. It will not work, but it will clean your bicycle chain components beautifully. Now I'm going to finish stage 10 of the Misspoke Cycling podcast by reading some further extracts from my autobiographical memoir, which is called My Life in Bikes. And we've reached 2011 now, and this is a slight interlude, and I've called it Specialised Tarmac 2011. The first person I met when I joined the old Portland Cycling Club was a man called Phil, and we became good friends on the bike. In other words, we had lots to talk about when on a club ride, but did not meet away from the club, and I knew little about his life. I did know that he retired, from what? IT, possibly, a few months after I joined, and his retirement present to himself was a white Specialised Tarmac. Phil was well over 6 foot, and his bike was an extra large with a Shimano 105 group set. Phil used to do a lot of time trials when he was younger, and still did, and strove for better times, not as fast as he used to be, but still way stronger than I. There were a few old school members in the club who did not wear cycle helmets, and Phil was one of them. Instead he wore a cap, and if it was cold, a beanie hat. I used to talk to him about it, as I knew he had 2 children, but his attitude was that they weren't compulsory, and he was an experienced cyclist, and if Coppi and Pantani and Bartali and Hino and all the others had not needed them, why did he? On the Maybank holiday weekend, there were half a dozen of us on the regular Saturday club ride. Riding through Knockholt, not fast, about 16 miles an hour, Phil hit a pothole and came off his bike and landed on his head, his helmetless head. I was riding behind him and saw it happen. I managed to get his wife's phone number from one of the other club members and called her to tell her what had happened. Phil was taken to hospital in the air ambulance, but he did not regain consciousness and died a week later. I saw his wife and children a few times at the hospital, and after he died, his wife asked me to collect his bicycle from the police who were holding it while they conducted their investigation into his death. And that's how Phil's white Specialised came into my possession. It had sustained some damage, handlebars twisted, brake levers bent, but nothing as serious as the damage Phil sustained, although when I collected it from the police, Phil's shoes were still attached to the pedals. His feet had come out of his shoes, but the shoes remained attached to the pedals. They looked incongruous, those giant shoes. Phil had big feet, spinning uselessly on the pedals. After a few weeks, Phil's wife decided that she couldn't face having the bicycle back and asked me to dispose of it. I thought about it for a while and discussed it with other club members. I thought of selling it on eBay and giving the proceeds to his family, but I was uneasy about selling a bike that had been involved in a fatality and not telling the new owner. Eventually, another club member, Polish triathlete, the same height as Phil, asked if he could have it. I spoke to Phil's wife and she was happy with that outcome, so we gave it to him. He had a dedication to Phil made up and stuck on the bike, and made a donation to the family and became the proud owner of a white Specialised Tarmac. Planet X, 2012. But about that winter bike. Planet X had a good reputation and they were selling an aluminium winter bike. Shiny blue and also with a SRAM group set, only Force this time, their second tier set after Red. Mail order, and it arrived in a few days. I liked that bike and got some mudguards for it. I was now beyond the Specialised LA. That was an entry-level bike with an entry-level group set, and I was no longer an entry-level rider, so I sold it to someone in the club who wanted it for the turbo. I underpriced it, but so what? Now I had 3 bikes, the Cervelo, the Roberts, and the Planet X, and I was a regular on the club runs. But who has only 3 bikes? No one. And the market was now talking about endurance bikes. I read about them in the magazines. Endurance bikes had a slightly more relaxed geometry, a higher head tube, a more upright position, and they often had dampeners or some other clever technology to reduce stiffness in the frame, and they were designed for longer distance rides like sportives, which I had started doing. That sounded like me, and I didn't have an endurance bike. Make sure you tune in for stage 11 of the Misspoke podcast, and you can learn which was the endurance bike I subsequently purchased. You've been listening to Misspoke, a cycling podcast during the coronavirus period lockdown. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you're staying safe. I hope your family are keeping well. I hope financially you're not suffering too much and you're looking forward to coming through this and coming out the other side. And I hope in the meantime I can entertain you with this little podcast. Keep listening to the Misspoke podcast and listen out for stage 11. Take care.